Nikita Burns. Nikita Burns was 23 years old in June 2023, residing at temporary accommodation in Bundoran, County Donegal. Her solicitor would later describe her upbringing as tumultuous, marked by early placement in care, homelessness, substance experimentation, and deteriorating mental health. She had no prior convictions. Her co-accused, Alan Vile, 39, was described as a former lover of a few weeks. On the evening of Saturday, June 24th, Burns, Vile, and their victim Robert Wilkin, 66 years old, spent hours drinking across pubs in Killybegs and Dunkinneely. Wilkin was a native of Omagh who had recently moved in with Vile. They departed together in a Volkswagen Passat in the early hours of Sunday morning. Between 2 and 2:15 a.m., the vehicle stopped at Roshine, a stretch of road between Killybegs and Ardara. There, Wilkin suffered at least 2 depressed skull fractures from being struck with a rock, blood spattered across the interior roof and saturated the back seat. Burns and Vile then drove to Sliablies, among Europe's tallest sea cliffs at approximately 600 meters, and disposed of Wilkin's body over the edge. Burns took money from the victim's pocket. The pair used it to purchase cannabis. They returned to the cliffs at 5 a.m. and again at 3 p.m. to check whether the body was visible. CCTV captured these movements. At Teelan Pier, Vile waded into the water to wash his hands and discarded his blood-stained shirt into the sea. Burns initially told friends that Wilkin had been making unwanted advances toward her, which angered Vile. However, Vile later acknowledged this claim was a fabricated story they concocted together. The Irish Coast Guard recovered Wilkin's body from the sea on July 2nd, 8 days after the incident. But the breakthrough came earlier. On June 26th, Vile crashed the Passat into a ditch near Glenties and was arrested for drunk driving. Garda Aaron Minahan noticed blood on the vehicle's interior roof and cleaning products in the back. What sealed the case was a phone call. Burns, taken to Letterkenny Hospital after the crash, walked to the home of her friend Chris Quinn, arriving in a distressed state. She repeatedly stated she had harmed a man with a rock. She then phoned another acquaintance, Sharon O'Dowd, making similar admissions. O'Dowd recorded the call using a second phone and immediately brought it to Gardaí. On the recording, Burns said they had pushed the man off Sliablies and that authorities would not find him. Physical evidence mounted. A blood and hair-stained rock at the cliff top matched Wilkin's DNA. His blood was found in the Passat and on Burns' leggings. His phone was recovered at Vile's residence. His glasses, watch, and neck chain were found near the cliff edge. State pathologist Dr. Margot Bolster identified 2 depressed skull fractures entirely consistent with the recovered rock. Burns was arrested on August 28, 2023. Her reply when charged was a denial. The trial took place at the Central Criminal Court before Mr. Justice Paul McDermott, running approximately 2 months from January to March 2025. Both defendants pleaded not guilty, each blaming the other. Burns claimed Vile struck the victim while she begged him to stop. Vile testified that Burns struck the victim, claiming he had been trying to protect her. On March 6, 2025, a jury of 7 women and 5 men returned a 10-2 majority guilty verdict against both defendants. They received mandatory life sentences the following day. What role does a recorded confession play when the accused later denies involvement? Mr. Justice McDermott commended Gardaí for conducting an extensive and difficult inquiry. Wilkin's sister, Irene McAleer, delivered a victim impact statement describing the defendants as calculating individuals who had discarded her brother's body, as though his life held no value. As of early 2026, Nikita Burns is serving her mandatory life sentence. Her solicitor stated that custody has presented difficulties, with periods of struggle, but that incarceration has provided opportunity for reflection. She received an additional 4-month concurrent sentence in April 2025 for an unrelated incident involving 2 Gardaí in January 2023. Burns and Vile disposed of a body from one of Europe's highest cliffs. But the next case would unfold within a home where a child should have been safe. Tegan McGee. Tegan McGee was 32 years old at sentencing in January 2026. A native of Limerick with no fixed abode. She was the partner of John Paul O'Connell, the biological father of the victim. McGee served as the primary caretaker of O'Connell's young son in their rented home in Rathbane, Limerick City. The child had been born in early 2016. His parents separated after his birth. In September 2020, his mother, experiencing mental health difficulties, voluntarily transferred custody to O'Connell and McGee. She later described her son as a loving, caring, clever child. The child had been subjected to continuous physical harm for weeks or months before his passing. For the final 4 days of his life, he was confined to his bedroom. He was forced to sit on the floor, never permitted on his bed, and allowed out only for food or the toilet. Family members who attempted to visit were denied access and told he was grounded. 2 birthday parties took place downstairs while he remained isolated upstairs. On the morning of March 13th, 2021, O'Connell left for work. McGee asked him to stay, expressing concern that someone would see the marks on the child's face. She applied arnica cream to reduce the visible bruising. After O'Connell departed, McGee went upstairs, asked the child why he could not behave, then by her own account lost control. She shook him and screamed before he fell to the floor. She also struck his head against the floor. After harming the child, McGee sent O'Connell a text message asking why he had left, stating she needed him home, that he should not have left, and knew that. CCTV showed her running up and down the stairs every 2 minutes from 11:06 a.m. to 12:35 p.m. She searched online for why it would be dangerous if someone sustained a head injury and then fell asleep. After O'Connell returned home, there was a further 8-minute delay before he called emergency services, telling them his son had fallen from a bunk bed. When paramedics arrived, the child was on the floor in the fetal position, unresponsive, covered in multicolored bruises of different ages. Dr. Stephen O'Riordan testified that the entire theater gasped when medical staff saw him. He documented 17 areas of injury across both eyes, ears, arms, legs, and back. Despite emergency surgery, the child did not recover. His mother, Elizabeth Conway, made the decision to withdraw life support. He passed away on March 16, 2021, 3 days after the injuries. Reporting restrictions remained in place throughout to protect a witness. The identities of McGee and O'Connell could not be published until the judge lifted the order at sentencing, following a successful legal application by RTE and Mediahuis. O'Connell was sentenced in November 2024 to 7 years after pleading guilty to endangerment, neglect, and impeding McGee's apprehension. McGee initially pleaded not guilty, but guilty to manslaughter. 4 days into the trial, after medical evidence was presented, she changed her plea. How does a 4-day confinement, with birthday parties happening 1 floor below, go unnoticed by everyone who visited that home? On January 14, 2026, Mr. Justice Paul McDermott imposed a mandatory life sentence plus 4.5 years on each of 2 cruelty charges. He described the case as an appalling breach of trust involving continuing harm and isolation. Elizabeth Conway delivered a victim impact statement describing how 2 individuals robbed her son of his life when he was only 4 years old. As McGee was led away, a family friend called out from the gallery. McGee's own sister Shannon publicly described her as someone who had deceived the entire family for a full year. As of early 2026, Tegan McGee is serving her mandatory life sentence while on remand in Limerick Prison. She was subjected to threatening behavior from a fellow prisoner who was later acquitted of those charges in October 2024. McGee's case involved the harm of a child entrusted to her care. The next case would involve planning within the context of Ireland's most notorious gangland feud. Regina Keogh. Regina Keogh was 41 years old at conviction, a mother of 5 from Cumberland Street North, Dublin 1. Her brother Jonathan Keogh was the gunman in the incident. Another brother, Michael Keogh, had connections to organized criminal networks and was himself shot in May 2017 in what was believed to be a retaliatory action. The victim was Gareth Hutch, 36 years old, nephew of notorious Dublin criminal Jerry the Monk Hutch. On the morning of May 24, 2016, at approximately 9:55 a.m., Gareth Hutch was shot as he entered his vehicle outside Avondale House Flats, North Cumberland Street. He suffered 4 gunshot wounds. The shooters were Jonathan Keogh and Thomas McConnell. Gardaí believe Gareth Hutch had no involvement in organized groups and was targeted solely because of his family name. 3 months before his passing, he had carried the coffin of his uncle Eddie Hutch, who was shot following the Regency hotel attack of February 2016. The court found that Regina Keogh was instrumental in the planning through collusion with her brother Jonathan. She pressured her best friend and neighbor of 16 years, Mary McDonnell, to allow Jonathan to use McDonnell's flat as a lookout position. The kitchen window provided a direct line of sight into Gareth Hutch's residence. Keogh told McDonnell that this was the only way the plan would work, and that if it did not happen, Jonathan would himself be shot. The night before the incident, Keogh delivered latex gloves to McDonnell's flat for the shooters to use the following morning. CCTV corroborated her movements. The key witness was Mary McDonnell, initially arrested on suspicion but granted immunity from prosecution in exchange for testimony. She now lives in state protection. DNA from Jonathan Keogh was found on the latex gloves in McDonnell's flat. CCTV and telephone records corroborated McDonnell's account. Keogh denied any knowledge in Garda interviews. The case was heard at the Special Criminal Court, Ireland's non-jury, 3-judge court used for organized criminal cases, presided over by Mr. Justice Tony Hunt, Judge Patricia Ryan, and Judge Michael Walsh. The 9-week trial concluded with guilty verdicts for Regina Keogh, Jonathan Keogh, and Thomas Fox on November 2, 2018. All received mandatory life sentences. Mr. Justice Hunt found this was not a spontaneous incident, but one involving considerable planning and coordination. He convicted Regina Keogh with reluctance, noting she was a person of good character, but was guilty due to her involvement. When does pressuring a friend and delivering supplies cross the line from association to participation? Gareth Hutch's mother, Vera, delivered a victim impact statement stating that the defendants had taken away her will to live and broken her spirit. In December 2024, a 4th individual, Thomas McConnell, identified as the second gunman, was convicted and sentenced to life in January 2025 after extradition from Turkey. Keogh appealed to the Court of Appeal, which dismissed her challenge in July 2021. Mr. Justice McCarthy called the DNA complaint simply wrong. Her application to the Supreme Court was refused in June 2022. As of 2026, all appeals are exhausted. Regina Keogh continues to serve her mandatory life sentence. Keogh's role involved planning and facilitation rather than pulling a trigger. The next case would involve direct harm to a child in the accused's temporary care. Karen Harrington. Karen Harrington was 38 years old at conviction, originally from Mahon, Cork. She grew up in what was described as a somewhat dysfunctional family. From 15 years old, she effectively raised her 3 younger sisters after her mother fell ill. She was known locally as a childminder and babysitter, with no prior history of concern. She had been in a relationship with Michael Cawley for approximately 6 months. The victim was born premature on May 6, 2017, weighing just over 10 kilograms at the time of the incident. She was the daughter of Michael Cawley and Bridget O'Donoghue, who had separated in March 2018. Her mother described her as a child who seemed wise beyond her years, someone who fought from the moment she arrived. On the evening of July 4, 2019. Cawley, Harrington, and the child spent time at a friend's apartment in Elderwood, Cork, where alcohol and cannabis were consumed. And argument erupted when Cawley wanted his cousin to stay at Harrington's apartment. She refused, and he became verbally aggressive. Harrington returned to her apartment at 1:36 a.m. At approximately 3:06 a.m., Cawley arrived with his daughter, spent about 4 minutes there, left the child on a duvet, argued with Harrington again, and then departed to find his cousin in Cork City Centre. From 3:10 a.m. to 5:07 a.m., Harrington was alone with the child. At 3:19 a.m., CCTV shows Harrington slamming a sliding door and shouting incoherently. Neighbors reported the door slammed 30 to 40 times. One neighbor heard a child crying and being taunted, told to be quiet. At 4:31 a.m., a neighbor called Gardaí with a noise complaint. Crucially, the caller did not mention the child. Gardaí attended at approximately 4:52 a.m., but received no response at the door and departed. When Cawley returned at 5:07 a.m., a neighbor warned him Harrington had been screaming at the baby. He entered the apartment, spending only 49 seconds inside. He found kitchen chairs overturned, blood, broken glass, and the child lying under a blanket, unresponsive, with injuries across her face and body. Harrington fled the scene. The child was transported to Cork University Hospital, where she passed away at 9:20 a.m. on July 5th in her mother's arms. The child suffered 53 separate injuries, 49 external and 4 internal. The cause of passing was traumatic brain injury and upper spinal cord injury, together with polytrauma. She had fractures to her skull, arm, femur, and ribs. Assistant State Pathologist Dr. Margaret Bolster testified that her head appeared to have been struck against a flat surface. There was scarcely a part of her body without an injury. 90 Gardaí worked the investigation, taking over 200 statements and examining more than 300 hours of CCTV from approximately 70 locations. Critical footage from a private camera established that Harrington did not leave the apartment between 1:36 a.m. and 5:09 a.m., and that no one else entered. DNA evidence linked Harrington directly to the child's injuries. The 14-day trial at the Central Criminal Court, sitting in Cork before Mr. Justice Michael McGrath, heard from over 100 witnesses. Harrington's defense offered no claim of provocation or diminished responsibility. She testified for approximately 20 minutes, stating only that she did not take the child's life. Prosecution counsel described Harrington as someone walking between raindrops, convincing herself she was not getting wet, but standing drenched in the evidence. If the neighbor had mentioned the child in the noise complaint, or if Gardaí had forced entry at 4:52 a.m., would the outcome have been different? On May 16, 2022, the jury returned a unanimous guilty verdict after 4 hours 46 minutes. Mr. Justice McGrath described the case as truly shocking and stated that losing a child in these circumstances was beyond description. He exempted the jury from further service for life. Harrington appealed to the Court of Appeal, arguing her privacy rights were breached by the CCTV evidence. The appeal was dismissed on June 6, 2024 by Miss Justice Isabel Kennedy, who noted that Harrington's own defense team had actually requested the contested CCTV be played to the jury. As of 2026, Karen Harrington continues to serve her mandatory life sentence. Harrington's case involved a single night. The next case would involve a relationship that ended with 28 wounds. Rita O'Driscoll. Rita O'Driscoll was 48 years old at conviction, from Bridge Street, Bandon, County Cork. A mother of 2, she came from a large traveler family and was described as a grandmother, Sunday school teacher, and devoted Christian. She had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and was receiving psychiatric treatment. A critical detail emerged during proceedings. Just 3 days before the incident, O'Driscoll had been admitted to and then discharged from the psychiatric unit at Cork University Hospital. Her children later claimed she had asked doctors not to release her. expressing concern she would harm herself or someone else. On October 8, 2018, at a residence in Macroom, County Cork belonging to Jason Foley, O'Driscoll took the life of her former husband Timothy Foley, 44 years old. The trio had been drinking together. Sometime after midnight, a violent altercation erupted. Jason Foley testified that O'Driscoll began striking Timmy in the stomach with a knife. Timmy said he was finished and began calling out. Timothy Foley suffered 28 stab wounds ranging from superficial punctures to 112 centimeters deep. 4 were potentially fatal, affecting his carotid artery, right axillary vein, right lung, and lower liver. The weapon, a curved steak knife, was found concealed in a toilet cistern. A critical piece of evidence was the 999 emergency recording. On it, Timothy Foley is heard asking Rita to stop, pleading for someone to get help. O'Driscoll's account changed multiple times. She initially claimed she struck Timmy twice in self-defense. She then claimed Jason had inflicted the remaining wounds. The prosecution presented evidence of her possessiveness and prior threats, including statements that if she could not have her husband, then nobody could, and threats to set him on fire. Her niece testified such threats had become so frequent, they almost became normal. The 13-day trial, the Central Criminal Court, sitting in Cork before Ms. Justice Eileen Creedon, heard from approximately 40 witnesses. Prosecution counsel challenged the self-defense claim by pointing to the 28 wounds versus her claim of only 2 strikes, the emergency recording, and her contradictory accounts. The defense argued diminished responsibility based on her psychiatric history. A jury of 5 men and 7 women returned a unanimous guilty verdict after 6 hours, 17 minutes. When the verdict was read, her daughter called out from the gallery, asking for divine forgiveness for those involved. What weight should a psychiatric discharge 3 days prior carry in assessing culpability? The Foley family's victim impact statement described how their lives changed forever that October morning, and how they could have been spared years of agony if O'Driscoll had accepted responsibility from the beginning. O'Driscoll appealed to the Court of Appeal, arguing the trial judge erred in allowing a key witness to give evidence via video link and through an intermediary. The appeal was dismissed in January 2022. Mr. Justice Birmingham ruled the trial judge's decisions were unimpeachable. Her children have pursued an online petition and claim to be preparing a Supreme Court appeal. As of 2026, no such appeal has been filed. Rita O'Driscoll remains serving her mandatory life sentence. O'Driscoll's case involved a single confrontation. The next case would span 3 separate trials over 5 years. Paula Farrell. Paula Farrell was 40 years old at the time of the incident, residing at Rathmullen Park, Drogheda, County Louth, where she had lived for 23 years. A mother of 3, she had left secondary school early and worked various jobs, including as a machinist. Clinical psychologist Dr. Kevin Lamb testified she was an angry person with an IQ at the borderline for intellectual difficulty. She had a history of alcohol-induced episodes and reported childhood trauma. She had no previous convictions. On New Year's Day, 2014, Farrell took the life of her partner, Wayne McQuillan, 30 years old, known locally as Quilly, a former painter and decorator from Drogheda. The incident occurred at her home after a drinking session that had begun at 3 p.m. on New Year's Eve. Farrell had consumed at least 9 cans of cider. McQuillan was 6 times over the legal driving limit. A confrontation broke out. Farrell selected the largest knife from a kitchen knife block and struck McQuillan 4 times, once to the upper right arm, once to the front of the chest, and twice to the left shoulder. McQuillan stumbled outside covered in blood, calling out that he had been struck. Farrell told onlookers not to call an ambulance. Due to a 30-minute delay, Gardaí drove him to hospital in their patrol car. He suffered cardiac arrest en route, was resuscitated, but a second arrest proved fatal. He was pronounced deceased at 4:29 a.m. The pathologist testified he could potentially have survived with prompt medical intervention. Farrell claimed McQuillan had harmed her and attempted to restrict her breathing when she refused intimacy. The prosecution called this an outrageous lie, noting she did not make the allegation until 16 months after the incident. This case went through an extraordinary 3 separate trials. The first trial in July 2015 resulted in a unanimous guilty verdict and life sentence. However, the trial judge did not allow the partial defense of provocation to be considered by the jury. In June 2018, the Court of Appeal quashed the conviction, ruling that provocation should have been put to the jury and ordered a retrial. The second trial in July 2019 ended in a hung jury. The third trial in March 2020, before Mr. Justice Paul McDermott, saw a jury of 7 men and 4 women find Farrell guilty by unanimous verdict after 4 hours 55 minutes. The jury rejected the provocation defense. Farrell was sentenced to mandatory life imprisonment, backdated to July 1st, 2015. What does it mean for a victim's family to attend 3 separate trials, hearing the same evidence presented 3 times over 5 years? Wayne McQuillan's sister Audrey delivered a victim impact statement describing how Farrell had not only taken their son and brother, but had also taken all their hopes and dreams, his future and their future too. No further appeals have been reported. Paula Farrell remains serving her mandatory life sentence, backdated to her original 2015 conviction. She has now served over 11 years since New Year's Day, 2014. Farrell's case required 3 trials to reach a final verdict. The next case would involve 2 separate incidents on consecutive nights. Catherine O'Connor. Catherine O'Connor was approximately 35 years old at the time, a native of Kinsale, County Cork. A mother of 3, she had a history of substance use and had lived rough in Cork City before undergoing rehabilitation and moving to Bridge House, Sean Hale's Place, Bandon, an upstairs flat that would become known locally by a grim description. She had 55 previous convictions. On the night of one incident, she told Gardaí she had been taking hallucinogenic substances and was consuming 4 bottles of spirits daily, supplemented with tablets and cough mixture. Her co-accused was Ciprian Grozavu, known as Chippy, a Romanian national. The first victim was John Forrester, 42 years old, an English father of 4, originally from Blackpool. He lived in a flat at Bridge House and was a boat builder who had known O'Connor from her time living rough. It was believed he had expressed feelings for her, which sparked a confrontation. On November 12, 2011, after a day of heavy drinking, O'Connor, Grozavu, and Forrester ended up in Forrester's flat. Grozavu restricted Forrester's breathing using a homemade ligature, while O'Connor struck him repeatedly in the face with the jagged ends of broken ceramics. He suffered a fractured skull, broken ribs, a broken hip, and extensive lacerations. The body was wrapped in carpet, feet bound with the belt from O'Connor's cardigan, and disposed of over a wall into the River Bandon. It was recovered on November 15th, a mile and a half east of town. The following night, November 13th, 2011, Jonathan Duke, 27 years old, a father of 1 from Bandon, was also taken. Gardaí believe he had discovered evidence of the Forrester incident at Bridge House. Duke suffered over 100 injuries. He was restricted using electrical flex wrapped around his neck and the cord from his own hoodie. Neighbors in the flat below heard the confrontation for approximately 15 minutes. One heard O'Connor tell Grozavu to drag him, that he was already gone, that he could not feel it. They watched from a window as the pair disposed of the body over railings into the River Bandon. Neighbors described O'Connor laughing and Grozavu making sounds like howling, as though they were proud of what they had done. The neighbors fled and called emergency services. How does a person harm 2 individuals on consecutive nights, disposing of both bodies in the same river, and express satisfaction rather than horror? Gardaí followed a trail of blood from the front door up the stairs to the flat. O'Connor's fingerprint was found in Forrester's blood on a broken cup. Duke's DNA was found under her fingernail. Forrester's blood was found on a mobile phone in her flat. Her cardigan belt was discovered binding Forrester's feet. At separate trials at the Central Criminal Court, sitting in Cork before Mr. Justice Paul Carney, O'Connor faced justice for both incidents. In the Duke case in July 2013, she was found guilty by unanimous verdict after 2 hours, 49 minutes. Justice Carney's only question was what this had all been about. Gardaí could not establish a motive beyond heavy drinking. In the Forrester case in October 2013, O'Connor pleaded guilty. She received a second life sentence. Duke's sister Cindy read a family statement describing the pain as something that made them feel they could die. Forrester's nephew said he hoped she would never see the light of day again. Grozavu was also convicted of both incidents, but successfully appealed the Duke conviction. At retrial in 2021, he was acquitted of the primary charge but convicted of impeding O'Connor's apprehension and sentenced to 8 years. O'Connor's convictions stand. No appeal by her has been reported. As of 2026, she continues serving 2 concurrent life sentences. O'Connor's case involved consecutive nights. The next case became known across the nation for its method of concealment. Charlotte Mulhall. Charlotte Mulhall was 21 years old at the time of the incident in March 2005. From Kilclare Gardens, Tallaght, South Dublin. She came from a working-class family with a troubled upbringing. Her sister Linda Mulhall, then 30, was her co-accused. Their mother Kathleen had left their father and entered a relationship with the victim. Farah Swale Noor, 40 years old, was a Kenyan national who had arrived in Ireland in December 1996 under a false identity. He obtained citizenship in 1999. He had previous convictions and a documented history of harming individuals. Gardaí described him as particularly antagonistic towards women. He was in a relationship with Kathleen Mulhall, who alleged daily harm. On March 20th, 2005, St. Patrick's weekend, Linda, Charlotte, Kathleen, and Noor spent the day drinking heavily in Dublin city centre before returning to Kathleen's flat at Richmond Cottages, Summerhill. The women took ecstasy. Kathleen crushed a tablet into Noor's drink. While seated on a couch, Noor began making unwanted advances toward Linda, speaking in her ear and refusing to release her. Kathleen intervened, and an argument erupted. Kathleen allegedly asked her daughters to end him for her. Charlotte picked up a Stanley knife and slashed Noor across the throat, sending him to the ground. Linda then struck him repeatedly with a hammer. He was struck more than 20 times total. The sisters then dragged the body to the bathroom and dismembered it over several hours using a kitchen knife and hammer, severing his head, limbs, and other parts. Body parts were placed in bags and deposited in the Royal Canal over several trips. To prevent identification, the head was not placed in the canal. Instead, the 3 women carried it by public bus to Tallaght, walked through the Square shopping center, and Charlotte buried it in Sean Walsh Memorial Park. Days later, Linda exhumed the head, destroyed it with a hammer, and distributed fragments in rubbish bins in Phoenix Park. The head was never recovered. 10 days after the incident, a portion of Noor's leg, still wearing a sock, was spotted floating in the Royal Canal near Croke Park. Divers recovered most of the body in 7 parts. Noor was identified when a Somali man recognized a T-shirt on the recovered torso. The breakthrough came when Linda contacted investigators weeks after her arrest and provided a voluntary statement admitting involvement. Bloodstains in Kathleen's flat matched Noor's DNA. On the day the sisters were charged in December 2005, their father John Mulhall took his own life in Phoenix Park. What does it mean for a family when the father takes his own life on the same day his daughters are charged? The October 2006 trial at the Central Criminal Court before Justice Paul Carney heard how Charlotte wielded the Stanley knife and inflicted the potentially fatal throat wound, while Linda struck with the hammer. The jury determined Charlotte bore greater culpability. Charlotte was found guilty of the primary charge and received mandatory life sentence. Linda was found guilty of manslaughter and received 15 years. Justice Carney called it the most grotesque matter that had occurred in his professional lifetime. Charlotte's appeal was dismissed. The Court of Criminal Appeal ruled the jury was entitled to return different verdicts for each sister. Kathleen Mulhall returned voluntarily from England in 2008, pleaded guilty to helping conceal evidence, and received 5 years. Charlotte has now served approximately 20 years. In 2024, she was granted supervised day releases and her first overnight unsupervised release. At Christmas 2025, she received temporary release. She is reported to be set for full release in 2026. Linda was released in 2018 after serving over 12 years. Charlotte had a child while in prison who was placed in foster care. She has been described as a model prisoner. Charlotte's case became notorious nationally. The next case would involve a vehicle used as an instrument. Martha Herda. Martha Herda, a Polish national, was 29 years old at sentencing in July 2016. She worked as a waitress and lived at Park na Sile, Emaclew Road, Arklow, County Wicklow. A critical detail would emerge during proceedings. She was a competent swimmer. Shortly before 6 a.m. on March 26, 2013, Herda drove her Volkswagen Passat at high speed along South Quay, Arklow, a 200-meter straight stretch of pier described as resembling a runway. The vehicle crashed through 2 barriers and plunged into the deep harbor. Her passenger, Csaba Orsos, 31 years old, a Hungarian colleague who could not swim and had an aversion to water, drowned. Herda, the competent swimmer, escaped through the driver's window. The prosecution argued she had lured Orsos into her car and used it as an instrument to end his life. Key physical evidence emerged. The handbrake had been applied before the car entered the water, and the only open window was on the driver's side. Orsos had spent approximately 2 years following Herda, texting and phoning her, professing feelings. She told Gardaí she considered him a nuisance and pest. CCTV showed her driving to his area at 5:30 a.m. and phoning him 3 times before the incident. Her own words would prove significant. To a paramedic at the scene, she said he should not have been there, that she drove the car into the water. To a Garda, she said when she drove into the water, she wanted it all to stop. She said he had passed because of his feelings for her, that it was constant, and she could not take it anymore. To a nurse, she said he did not think she would do it. In formal interviews months later, she reversed course entirely, claiming it was an accident caused by an argument in the car. At the Central Criminal Court before Mr. Justice Patrick McCarthy, a jury of 8 men and 4 women found Herda guilty by majority verdict, 11-1, after 8 hours, 11 minutes. She was sentenced to mandatory life imprisonment on July 28, 2016. Herda showed no emotion at the verdict, but wept as the sentence was imposed. When a person makes spontaneous statements immediately after an incident, then provides a contradictory account months later, which version should investigators trust? Her Court of Appeal challenge was dismissed in October 2017. Mr. Justice Mahum called it fanciful to suggest driving a car off a pier at high speed was deliberate but not intended to end a life. The Supreme Court refused to hear a further appeal. The Polish ambassador to Ireland wrote, expressing concern about the case, but the court ruled the letter should be disregarded. Her family has indicated they are pursuing the case to the European Court of Human Rights. As of 2026, Martha Herda remains serving her sentence at the Docha Centre, Mountjoy, Dublin. Herda's case involved a vehicle and the sea. The final case would unfold on Christmas Eve, during Ireland's winter of the big snow. Greta Dudko. Greta Dudko, a Lithuanian national, was 36 at sentencing in October 2014. A trained nurse employed at New Park Care Centre in the ward North Dublin, she had been regarded as one of the best nurses at her workplace. Colleagues described her as competent and dedicated. But in the months before December 2010, a serious alcohol problem had taken hold. She was suspended from her nursing position in early December due to intoxication at work. The career she had built was unraveling. She was married to Vitaly Dudko and was the mother of a young son. The marriage had deteriorated. In the weeks before Christmas, Dudko, her mother, and her toddler had moved out of the marital home. The separation was not final. Dudko wanted to reconcile with Vitaly, but there was an obstacle. The victim was Anna Butautien, 55 years old, a Lithuanian national who had moved to Ireland specifically to help care for her grandson. Anna lived with her daughter and grandchild. She was a constant presence in the household. According to Dudko, her mother had opinions about the marriage. According to the prosecution, Anna was perceived as standing in the way of reconciliation. December 2010 brought what became known as Ireland's winter of the big snow. Temperatures plummeted. Roads became impassable. Families gathered for the holidays under difficult conditions. On Christmas Eve, Vitaly came to collect his wife and son for Christmas dinner at his home. He arrived to find Dudko intoxicated and asleep. Rather than wake her or wait for her to recover, he made a decision. He took their son and left. The toddler would spend Christmas with his father. His mother would remain behind. When Anna arrived home later that evening, she found her grandson gone. Her daughter was in an intoxicated state on Christmas Eve. A fierce argument erupted between mother and daughter. The specifics of what was said were never fully established at trial, but the outcome was clear. Dudko struck her mother's head against a wall twice, causing Anna to fall onto the bed. She then left the bedroom, walked to the kitchen, and retrieved a glass Irish Knight's liqueur bottle. She returned to the bedroom and struck her mother over the head twice with the bottle. Anna Butautien passed away from blunt force trauma on Christmas Eve, 2010. The aftermath revealed something further. Burnt remnants of a passport bearing Anna Butautien's name were found in the kitchen rubbish bin. The blood-stained liqueur bottle lay nearby. The prosecution argued this was an attempt to destroy identification, to complicate any investigation that might follow. The act suggested awareness of what had been done. The prosecution's theory was direct. Dudko wanted her mother exterminated from her life. Anna was an impediment to reuniting with Vitaly. The alcohol problem, the job suspension, the separation from her husband, the presence of her mother in the home, the removal of her son on Christmas Eve. The pressures had converged. Dudko told Gardaí she felt her mother was trying to end her marriage and ruin her life. The resentment had built over time. The confrontation on Christmas Eve became the breaking point. What does it mean to take your own mother's life on Christmas Eve? Then attempt to destroy her passport in the same kitchen. A first trial in summer 2013 ended in a hung jury. The jurors could not reach a verdict. The case would have to be heard again. At the 11-day retrial before Mr. Justice Paul Carney in October 2014, Dudko pleaded not guilty to the primary charge, but guilty to manslaughter. She was willing to accept responsibility for causing her mother's death, but disputed the intent required for the more serious conviction. The jury deliberated for 4.5 hours. They found her guilty of the primary charge by 11-to-1 majority. She was sentenced to mandatory life. Imprisonment, backdated to September 2011, when she had first been taken into custody. While on remand at Limerick Prison awaiting trial, a search of Dudko's cell uncovered controlled substances, prescription tablets, and a mobile phone disguised as a BMW car key fob. The discovery raised immediate questions about security within the facility. How had these items entered a prison? Who had provided them? Dudko pleaded guilty to possession for sale or supply, adding further charges to her record. Her nursing background, her knowledge of medications, made the discovery particularly concerning to authorities. No successful appeal against her conviction has been reported. As of 2026, Greta Dudko remains serving her mandatory life sentence for ending her mother's life on Christmas Eve 2010 during Ireland's winter of the big snow. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.